Good day everybody, it's Max and welcome back to InfraSpace Tips and Tutorials. That's right. And in today's tutorial episode, I want to give you my top 3 tips, maybe even a little bonus somewhere along the way, about what it is you need to do in InfraSpace to have a successful running mega city. Let's get into it. Okay, so you want to get into making really big cities. Now, the first big tip I got for you in trying to make really big cities is the 4-zone technique. There are 4 distinct zones in a mega city that will never connect to each other. You should never have them connect by road, never connect them by rail, never connect them at all. Okay, because each of these zones cause traffic in their own different ways, and you do not want them to interfere with each other. The first zone of the 4 zones is your building concrete zone. This zone is a very simplistic zone of sulfur miners, sand miners, your concrete maker buildings, and some storage. Okay. In fact, here's a bonus tip: you will never use storage in the city. Never put storage in the city itself. It's a never. Just don't do it. The biggest traffic creator of the city in general is storage buildings. So just don't do that. Okay? But let's get back now to the actual building concrete. So your building concrete zone is going to be a relatively small, not a big affair zone. It will be totally separate. It will have no connectivity to any other zone. And basically its job is just to make your building concrete as you see in the lower left-hand corner. So with that, this will never, its traffic and what it creates will never interfere with any other part of the other 3 zones. A second zone is now the building steel zone. Now, you do need steel in other things, but we'll get to that later. Okay, so in this case, you're going to build a dedicated steel building zone. And of course, again, down here in the lower left hand corner, as you can see, your building steel, this zone and its little buildings, you're going to need a little pile of iron ore somewhere. Again, it doesn't need to be really big, because all this little zone is going to do is just make your building steel. It is not connected to any of the city road network. So you notice this looked like it was no, this is a bridge over this major highway. This will not be connected to any other zone. Of course, you need a little iron ore with some miners on it. You need some carbon, of course, and we have our steel output, steel mills outputting into their own material storage. Okay? Again, never connect storage to your city. It will cause massive traffic problems. Big time. The third zone, of course, is your science zone. Now, your science zone is totally separated from the city. Do not connect it in any way to your city. By keeping your science zone separate from the city, anything that you haven't got district off, which we're going to talk about in a sec as well, will not try to feed science or your other small zones. So without having these separated, the city tries to share resources all over the place. And unless you're going to try to get into a lot of district maneuvering, it is much easier to create these separate zones. So you will want a separate science zone. And usually what I do is I go looking for a corner of the map which has the resources I need to create all the sciences, the 4 colored sciences. And then I will set up my science zone there. So in this case, there's enough iron over here, aluminum is over here, and a few other things are over here, sulfur, all those things. So as I could actually make my own science zone. And sure enough, yeah, I have steel being made over here in its own dedicated science steel, because you need steel for the motors and those kinds of things. Make this a zone. The fourth and final zone, of course, is the city itself. And of course, you can decide on how many of these zones you want to make. So of course, the city zones, and there's 6 required components. So of course, they need, skipping oxygen and survival food, because that's just a beginning start. Good meals, home appliances, computers, parks, home robots, culture, and VR education. Now, I know it's VR edutainment. It's a thing on my channel. You just got to have it. In this case, though, this is the version before the new traffic lights, which we're going to have a look at here shortly as well. So in this case, I don't have that. That is why the parks and the culture are not AOE affected here. Okay, so they are still delivering the old way, but of course the new updates, these are AOE, or area of effect buildings, which have a big circle around a period of buildings, and we're going to have a look at those soon enough. So this is my first big tip. Separate your build into 4 distinct zones. Your building concrete zone, your building steel zone, your science zone, and then the city itself. The second big tip I got for you: districts. Learn them, learn how to use them, be efficient with them. So, districts allow you to actually key component sections off and then force those things into specific areas. So, for example, let's have a look at this food district. So this is a good meals food district. So in this case, you need 3 things for good meals. You need vegetables. Okay, and I'm actually going to break this down into 2. You need fertilizer, which then goes into your vegetables, and you need meat to go in to actually good meal food processors. So I'm going to turn this off for a second so you can see the buildings. So here, of course, is our fertilizers. These are our actual vegetable farms. This is a meat processor, and then, of course, this is the meal factory. Now, you will notice I have this district off, and that is because we want these fertilizers and these vegetables to go to this food processor only, okay? And I want these meat processors to go to this food processor only. The sulfur I need for the fertilizer I have coming from a specific sulfur location only. And this will greatly reduce traffic. So if these were not district off, and I had several of these around the city, okay, so here's another one here, okay, there's another one here, there's another one up here, and if these weren't district off, what would happen is if, let's say, your vegetables had extra, okay, so they, because, I mean, you can work on ratios all day, but unless you're gonna pull out your mathematical genius calculator and try to get this down to the perfect exact science, chances are you're going to be a little over on each of these. And any extra vegetables this guy would have after he's done feeding his closest food processors would then try to start shipping that stuff to other food processors. That's when traffic begins, right? And we don't want traffic. Traffic is the #1 enemy. So we use districts very, very heavily to make sure that only the closest locations are used to handle this stuff. So in this case, here's another example of a food processor. In this case, the sulfur is coming right here, and then of course the vegetables are going into these food processing facilities, and this meat here is going into this food processing facilities. For example, you'll notice I have here, these are the computer zones. So in this case, in the computer zones, I have the electronics going to these computer zones only, okay? So yes, I may have a few extra buildings of electronics, but it will not try to send those extra electronics across the city to some other location that I don't know about, causing traffic. Then of course here you have the sand miners. They too will only send their sand into making microchips. Now again, in this case, there is lots of opportunity that this sand could go anywhere on this map, but I am forcing it here to prevent traffic. It will never leave. And in fact, the only traffic that comes out this road is the finished product, which is what I want. I want the finished product coming out and being delivered to my citizens. But I do not want unnecessary traffic coming out of this particular foundation to then flood my roads with sand trucks and microchip trucks and all them other crazy trucks clogging up my roads. So the biggest hint I got for you as tip number 2 is districts. Learn to use them, be efficient with them, and be aggressive with them. Don't just use one or two. If you want to get into making a big mega city, you are definitely going to have to get into making districts a top priority for function. That's my second tip. And for my third tip, it's all about the city itself. Now, you can try to make this one huge, massive city, and that's fine, but it's actually a little easier to work in smaller blocks. Now, I'm not saying that you need to actually district off these into their own zones, but that is kind of the way I treat them. So you'll notice here I have a 11,000 city block here. I have an 11,000 city block here, and for an experiment, I have a 2,000 city block back here, just for fun. But in this particular case, by sectioning off even like blocks of city, which is now going to become even more important now that they've changed parks, culture, and the entertainment stuff into AOE effects. By changing these, by focusing these into what I would call their actual own city zones, it allows you to create manageability in terms of their needs. So, for example, you'll notice this city here has a computer section, okay, which of course I can show by the district. And this city over here also has a computer section and is all together. And these two cities are totally separated. So these computers cannot be shared with that city over there, and those computers over there cannot be shared with this city over here. They are totally separate cities, but of course, the game does not care about this. Also, I have all my heavy industry outside. Then I put that heavy industry onto main rotary or main highway junctions, which then feed into the city. I don't try to directly feed my heavy industry into the city themselves. That just causes more traffic problems, okay? Especially when it comes to mega builds such as your robot district, okay? It takes a lot of stuff to make a robot district, and there is no need to try and shove them robots directly down the streets of your city. So in this case, we use fast highway transportation to then deliver that down into the city so as we can then just distribute down into the intersections that we want. That way, that traffic is not interfering with other big industries such as the computer industry or the VR education industry or your home appliance industry clogging up your roads. This will keep the traffic separated, it will keep it more spaced out, and in the end, you too can run a big, huge, multi-10K city center, and of course, have all that done. With the update out now, we can now have a look at my newest build of doing miniature city zoning and keeping all my smaller cities separate to add to the grand total. So in this case, this I guess we'll call it an octagon shape, has all the necessities needed to sustain this city circle. So now with the AOE effects of the stadium, the parks, and education. As you can see, we have a stadium in the center, which is covering all the buildings. We have parks, which are covering all the buildings. And we have the schools that are covering all the buildings. And this is all shoved into this nice little pattern. Now, actually, on my next playthrough, I'm probably going to take this pattern and run with it. And again, I am not going to try and shove all the things into this city. In fact, this city, besides the parks, besides the basics of oxygen and basic food, right, or survival food, I guess, as they want to call it. There they are right there. Simple farms. And the three pieces of what we'll call AOE buildings. So, of course, stadiums, parks, and education. The other three are coming from the outside. So robots, home appliances, fancy foods, right, and computers and VR education is all coming outside of this circle. And you will notice that there's very little traffic in the city itself. Again, keeping your city separated from your industrial districts, and then using those and then using the actual districts themselves on your actual building components will make things run much smoother in my earlier tips. But let's now have a look at traffic lights. So in this case, we'll take an intersection here. I know that's the stadium, dude. There we go. Here's an intersection. Now, one of the things the game does a lot is it tries to guess the best way to do an intersection. And I would actually focus on this before you focus on lights. So a lot of in fact, my city runs so good, I'm not even going to use lights in it. I just don't see any purpose. But in this case, you may run into the occasional intersection where a light might actually work well. But in this case, before you do that, I would actually work on flow-through lines. So in this case, you'll notice that all the left turn lanes, or all the left lanes on these, only make left turns. Okay? They don't allow for throughput. Now, if you're going to get into using traffic lights on this intersection, you will have to leave it like that, and I'll show you shortly. If you're not going to use traffic lights on this intersection, then you should be connecting these up, right? So as traffic can make left turns as well as straight through. And the reason is because you are losing lanes by not allowing that extra throughput. You basically have cut your 4-lane roads down to 2-lane roads with left turn lanes. Okay. Now, yes, if you're using the 6-lane roads on one side and the 4 lanes on the other, then yes, dedicated left turn lanes are great. But in this case, if you're not using a light on an intersection, allow more throughput. For sure. Now, I'm actually going to take these lines away. Why is that? Well, it turns out you can't actually use the traffic lights with it and at the same time get it to run correctly with throughput lanes like that for left turn lanes. I know, it's kind of strange, but this is what we've got. So in this case, we've now clicked on the little traffic light here, and we now have the traffic light settings for this intersection. So phase 0, of course, is the throughput of these lanes, and of course, because these are left turn only lanes, they of course are red, right? Now, if we go to phase 1, it's the opposite direction. Right? So in this case, it's like, oh, okay, we've allowed these guys to go straight through. Now we're allowing these guys to go straight through. Now, yes, everybody's allowed to make a right turn lane just about any time, right? Because right turn doesn't tend to affect almost nobody. So then phase 2 is when we're allowing this way to make left turn lanes. And then phase 3 is when we allow the other way to make left turn lanes. And that's perfectly fine. What you want to do now is you want to watch for the heavy traffic flow. So if I was just to go on guesswork on this, I would say that this is probably the more busier street. Okay, so phase 3 I would probably leave as 10 seconds, but phase 0 I might increase to 20 seconds. Okay, and then phase 1 10 seconds, but then phase 2 I would say like maybe 15 seconds, because this throughput here, as you can see, there's 3 trucks there. Well, there's only 1 truck down that way, but in this case, there's a little less traffic on this road than there is on this road. So you would have to let the game run for a bit, watch to see which way is got the more traffic, then start adjusting your times according to what it is you see for the traffic. And of course, we would want to make this way longer, so as we allow this traffic to come through longer for less jam ups. But don't get heavily reliant on using traffic lights. And again, you're almost an all or nothing in with a traffic light, because if you're starting to use traffic lights here, well, what are you going to do? You're going to start causing traffic to back up in other directions, which means you've got to put in more lights. So this is why I don't want to discourage the use of traffic lights, but at the same time, if you've used my earlier tips, your use of traffic lights will be very minimal to almost none. So that is how traffic lights work. And of course, we can always add more phases. So I can always just click here on the scroll bar on the left and add another phase. And of course, you could try to, you could do individual little type lanes. But in this case, the setups are usually fine. It's the timing you've got to work out. And that's what I would focus on first. With that, those are my top tips and tricks for working with InfraSpace in its current version. Now, I hope you get to enjoy the game. I love playing the game, and I can't wait to do another series on the game. Now that we have the traffic lights coming out, soon we're going to have the sandbox mode and a few other things. With the AOE effect buildings, my city is actually going to be changing a lot. So in the distance there, you can see my old style cities and those zonings. And here, of course, you can now see my new style zone cities and what I'm going to be doing with that. And chances are that will be in my next series. So with that, I hope you have great time building in InfraSpace. I'm Max, and I hope you enjoy these tips, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.